A portion of an under-construction bridge collapsed in Bihar's Madhubani yesterday, making it the fifth collapse in Bihar in the last 11 days. The areas that saw bridge collapses this month include Kishanganj, East Champaran, Siwan and Araria. Now, the district magistrate has said that heavy rainfall in the catchment area in Nepal led to a sudden rise in the water level, and one of the pillars of the bridge could not withstand the strong current. Beyond this, there's also politics that has erupted. The former Bihar Deputy Chief Minister, Tejasvi Yadav, has congratulated the power of the double-engine government, saying that only 5 bridges have collapsed this month itself. Now, we want to welcome to the broadcast Ms. Bheja Thindo, the Executive Program Director of Sustainable Cities. She's joining us right now. Ma'am, what we wanted to ask you is, in your perspective, where do you think the problem lies? What are the factors leading to the current situation in India's capital territory?
Yes, no, so I think it's the perfect storm, really, in the literal sense, right? So we have 3 things going on, really. One is that we have cities which have sprawled, and there's been unplanned development. Urbanization has led to ecosystems basically being either modified, degraded, and/or shrunk. So we've lost a host of blue-green infrastructure in the cities and the ecosystem services that they provide. For example, percolation. In Delhi itself, a study done by WRI India shows that, 66% of Delhi's new built-up area has come up in areas with high recharge potential. So basically, when you remove blue-green cover, put in, concrete that area, what happens is that when you get rains and we get dumped with 148 mm in a 3 to 4 hour time period, there's little percolation that is happening and the water has nowhere to go. Right? So that plus the infrastructure capabilities of cities were not designed to handle the kind of events that we're seeing these days. So a lot of the infrastructure in a lot of our big cities are almost pre-colonial. So they're, during the colonial period post that, 75, 80 years old. They've not been designed for the kind of events that we're seeing these days. So it's all come together to lead to the situations that we see year after year, repeating in city after city.
Now, beyond this, what exactly do our governments need to do differently, whether it's with the teams that they're working with or the amount of time in which they take to bring out a development project? Again, what's behind all of this?
Yeah, so I think, it's not just governments. It's basically a systems problem. Many people need to do many things, right? It's the government, it's the developers, it's many folks. But really, given the rate and recurrence and severity of climate events that we're going to be seeing, authorities are often tackling these issues in real time. So many of the solutions that they adopt in the short term may not get to the root cause, and they may offer temporary relief, right? Or just treat the symptoms. But we do need to get to the root cause and figure out, problem solving that is data-led, that is participatory, because if it is not data-led, if it is not evidence-led, science-led, participatory, then those solutions will be hard to sustain. So there are many things that can be done in the short and the long term. So in the short term, the first thing that we really need to do is, figure out data and the science behind all of this. So you can't manage what you can't measure. If you don't know where your stormwater lines are, to what extent they're clean and, they're operational, what their capacities are, what is your topography of the city, the environment, the state of the environment, water resources, the infrastructure carrying capacities, you can't do anything about it. So first is figuring out what you have. Second is, in the short term, again, developing, SOPs and RFPs for infrastructure development and management that takes into account climate vulnerability. So if you're laying a new pipeline somewhere, if you're building a road, how do you mainstream nature-based or hybrid infrastructure solutions, for example? The third is, the pressure on grey infrastructure, just realize that can be reduced perhaps by looking at nature-based solutions. Looking at protecting and restoring a blue-green cover in cities, which is rapidly getting lost. So even small interventions like when you're building a street, and putting some nature-based solutions there, putting a planting strip, putting some greening over there adds up to a lot because, streets, for example, are the largest public spaces in the city's context. So these kind of small interventions. And then definitely looking at stringent rules and enforcement for protection of ecological assets in sensitive areas. Not just rampantly letting development happen where it should absolutely not, and making sure that enforcement is there. And then in the long term, there are a bunch of things. So you're looking at plans for, upgradation of your infrastructure and its carrying capacity, looking at scientific assessments and calculations for what your stormwater drains need to be designed for, looking at developing climate action and resilience plans, and making them sort of coherent with other sort of development plans like master plans. In terms of master plan also, and a lot of Indian cities are developing those, looking at your environmental resource layer and its potential carrying capacity very closely to be able to direct development in areas which don't hamper your ecological assets. And there are growth models, and we have national policies around them. For example, transit-oriented development policy. And we can use that to disincentivize growth in ecologically sensitive areas. We also, at this point, need city-level disaster management plans that look at preparedness and resilience instead of just rescue and recovery. So we need to go beyond just rescue and recovery in our disaster management planning. And then the most important thing really for cities is to figure out and put in place, the capacities needed to design and deliver these interventions. Our stakeholder capacities, our state capacities are very low to kind of, understand and deliver on these intersectional problems. And we need to develop those. And the other thing is we need to prioritize funding for this kind of infrastructure. So as immediate preemptive steps, for example, we can create a dedicated fund for disaster management and target investments toward implementing nature-based solutions and hybrid infrastructure solutions, which can create these sponge and permeable areas in cities. So these are some of the long and short-term responses.
Absolutely. Ms. Dindo, very interesting inputs you have about what can be done in the future. But I also want to ask you out of curiosity, because you have so much experience with urban planning. Considering the situation in the capital after one day, of course, a record-breaking level of rainfall, but again, it took place in one day. Do you think any of the measures which you just mentioned, which will improve the way that Delhi works in the future, or even the country works in the future, do you think that any of that is being done at this point?
So some of it is being done in some parts, right? And not just in Delhi, in other cities in India. They are taking measures. They are looking at, for example, Mumbai Municipal Corporation. Now that they have a climate action plan for Mumbai and they've created a climate budget as well, they're looking at, for example, aligning some of their projects that are coming out of the stormwater department to align with better climate action to build for resilience. So there are places, Chennai is trying to do certain things. I think every city which has experienced this kind of incidents is trying their best. Bengaluru is looking at, restoring their blue-green infrastructure in their city very closely. And the reason for that is very simple. Your one flooding incident costs the exchequer, right? And it wipes out a considerable amount of the state's GDP, up to 10% in some, occasions and some estimates. And for every 1%, increase in flood and drought affected areas, your economic growth is reduced by 2.7%. So this impacts everybody, and it has, economic implications. And that's why a lot of cities are starting to look at some of these. The entry points are different. Some cities are starting with the data and looking at, what are the immediate term measures and by how much can then the flood affected areas and, all of that be reduced. But I think it's slowly starting to happen. It's encouraging.
All right, very interesting points that you've been able to bring to the table about what India can look forward to when it comes to the measures that we should be taking, especially on the ecological aspect. Also, you've spoken about blue-green cover and how important that actually is when it comes to urban planning. Ms. Dindo, thank you so much for taking out the time, talking to us about the situation, not just in Delhi, but across the country, considering that rainfall really does seem to bring it to a standstill. Thank you once again for joining us.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.